So obviously the Labour conference is now well underway, and I have to agree with David Gauke here. David Gauke, of course, a former member of the Conservative Parliament. He was one of the 21 Conservative MPs who had their whip removed by Boris Johnson. And it shouldn't be too surprising, as I said before, things like, net zero, there are Tories that agree completely. Yep, we agree with net zero. We see the business case, we see the opportunities. Let's, go, go, go. Same with HS2. The HS2 had 15 years of cross party consensus. And to quote Andy Burnham, was destroyed in one night in a Manchester hotel room. Then what it's been replaced with, these very piecemeal, what are now we thought was going to be the plan, but the government has now come out and said, "Oh, these are just suggestions of what we could do." they're not even committing to those ideas that they said that they were going to do as part of this northern transport plan to replace HS2. No, those are just some ideas, or some suggestions that they put forward. What an absolute disaster that entire thing was. It overshadowed the entire conference, and it has made the Conservatives once again show that they are completely incompetent, that they lack ambition, and that something which would be good, which would bring mass benefit to the country. So let's go over David Gauke and his criticisms, especially of Starmer, not Starmer here, but Rishi here, and say what he has done, that he's gifted Starmer the absolute best opportunity to show Labour as the party of competence. So let's get into what he had to say. But before we do get into that, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a notification link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. There is obviously, of course, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, the Pony Club down below as well. So over we go to Conservative Home. This piece called HS2, How Sunak Gifted Starmer Another Opportunity to Present the Labour Party as a Party of Competence. So, long-term decisions for a brighter future. That was last week's slogan of the Conservative Party conference. Sounded good to me. We need some long-term decision-making if we are to address big challenges we face. Low productivity, an aging population, climate change, the rise of AI, and geopolitical instability all require us to pursue policies that will not deliver the best benefits for some years after they've been implemented, but still have to be addressed. I can't disagree with him on that. All those are massive challenges, and they are not going away. We still do have incredibly low productivity compared to every single other European country around us. An aging population becoming an increasing problem, and yet our government is currently saying, no, we can't have all this immigration. It's not like our birth rate is jumping up to replace all these aging people. We need immigration. And yet they're against the very thing that could be helping us in all these things. Climate change, again, they've abandoned all the net zero stuff. That's going to be a huge disaster. The rise of AI, the Conservatives are doing nothing really in regards to that. They will say that they are, but there's no policy on the table. There's no ideas to form a coherent policy around AI, except we're keeping a close eye on AI to see how all this pans out. And of course, the geopolitical instability, not least, of course, Ukraine constantly should be anyone's mind. And of course, the events that have just happened this week, of course, in Israel, Palestine. So, and he's right. These aren't going to be delivered overnight. You have to think long term. You have to think what's going to happen in 3, 4, 5, so many years. And we've had a Conservative Party who consistently, since they came into power, has gone, we don't want to do any long-term policy because we don't even know if we will win the next general election. So we would rather do something for a quick win that doesn't solve any of the underlying issues, and it puts a sticking plaster over it, and it just makes it more expensive to fix the actual problem that they are trying to solve. We've seen this time and time again, and David Gauke is part of that party. He should not be abdicating that responsibility. But back to it. So all of that requires grown-up politics, and Rishi Sunak has always struck me as being a grown-up politician. He is evidently diligent and has an interest in policy, which is more that can be said for one recent Prime Minister. I wonder who he's talking about there. And understands that one should not take risks with the public finances, which is more than can be said about another recent Prime Minister. I wonder who he's talking about there. He has demonstrated pragmatism and common sense in resisting calls for underfunded tax cuts, agreeing to the Windsor Framework, and deciding that the UK should return to Horizon Europe. Well, first things first, he might have resisted it so far, but we'll see what happens when we get to the budget. Methinks that maybe if Sunak fell for the hard, very small call pushing to cancel HS2, methinks he's going to maybe bend somewhere on one of the tax cuts. The Windsor Framework, while he managed to get that done, still really hasn't solved a lot of the underlying problems in the border trading agreement. It didn't get back the DUP back into power sharing. Northern Ireland still does not have a government in Stormont. Ultimately, did not achieve its main objective. Now, of course, it may have sort of eased the pressure on the border that was there with the terrible Boris Johnson's border, but it's still not perfect. And then, of course, return to Horizon Europe. Well, congratulations. At least, he got one thing right, I suppose. But he continues. If one wants a prime minister who is administratively competent, one wants to ensure that the public money is spent wisely and cares more about the long-term good than short-term headlines. And Sunak has generally looked like someone who would pass those tests. In other words, he is a serious person. In that context, it has got to be said that last week the announcement of HS2 was not a good one for Sunak's reputation. There's plenty of other stuff you can take to Sunak's reputation, not just these announcements. But yeah, this wouldn't be the first time that Sunak has taken decisions for the short-term gain versus a true, better long-term benefit. Like I say, he was Chancellor of the Exchequer when some of these decisions that we've been talking about, were struck off. Boom, back to it. By accident, and of course, the snap of a briefing paper that was carelessly displayed in the front of the Downing Street photographer, the issue of HS2 had hung over the government in recent weeks, and this presumably had resulted in the announcement in Manchester that the train line to Manchester was not going to be built. This was far from ideal. On the merits of a decision, I'm skeptical that Sunak made the right call, but I have a degree of sympathy. You skeptically made the right call, but I have a degree of sympathy. If the future costs of completing HS2 have gone up considerably, it is perfectly reasonable to question whether the project is still worthwhile. Yes, it is absolutely worthwhile because it doesn't matter. This is a one-off cost. A one-off cost that will bring massive benefits. Doesn't matter that this has gone up, because the same thing happened to the Japanese when they were building the Shinkansen, the bullet train system that they have in Japan, and they get massive economic benefits from having that in place. That went over budget. That went over time of plan when it was meant to be complete, but they still built it because it was going to bring big economic benefits, benefits which they are still reaping to this day. You build it, it's a one-time cost, you get benefits year after year after year. It was not a sensible decision. Even if you want to go, oh, well, the costs were just going out of control, still a sensible decision. Send in the auditors. That's what you could have done. You could have sent in the auditors, assess why are all these costs spiraling? What's going on here? Is it just inflation? Is it something else? Find out what it is. Try and bring it under control. And you know what? If it is inflation, why not do subsidies? Why not give HS2 subsidies to help it buy the steel, the land, the stuff that it needed to get and build HS2 done? There could have been so much stuff done that the government could have done. They just didn't. And it just a complete lack of ambition. So it continues. There are very real downsides to dropping it. But it must come to a point with increased costs that mean continuing it is no longer justified. In other words, the actual design to scrap the second leg is one upon which reasonable people can disagree. The northern leg, once again, a one-off cost, would have brought massive benefit. The idea that you just scrap it because, oh, the costs are just becoming unjustified. No, you always justify this cost. You started off this whole thing about, long-term decision making. That's what we need. We need adult decisions. And yet now you are pedaling back on that statement. So, continues. The problem is the process. Some will argue that the complaints about the process are tedious and only interest to Whitehall insiders, and what matters is that the right decision is made. In this case, however, the process really does matter. The bad process will inevitably result with wasted taxpayers' money and will further undermine business confidence in the UK. And that is exactly what Sunak has done. He's wasted billions of pounds worth of taxpayer money on cancelling HS2, and you've completely undermined any business confidence that the UK is going to make long-term business plans, is going to be doing some of this stuff. Made UK, one of the UK's biggest manufacturing sort of trade bodies, has come out recently and said, hey, Sunak, we businesses want to see long-term planning. We want to see an industrial strategy for the UK. Is Sunak going to do that? No, of course he's not. Because he's only barely got probably a year left now in power, even less than that, depending when the next general election gets called. So it will further undermine business customers in the UK. Sunak, in failing to take the process seriously, has looked unserious himself. We are told that scrapping the second leg of HS2 will free up £360 billion, which will be spent entirely on transport infrastructure. In normal circumstances, having an additional £3.6 billion to spend on transport infrastructure will create a huge amount of work in detailing precisely how those funds would be invested. Which is, again, what we said at the beginning. All those new infrastructure projects they announced, oh no, those are just suggestions. What are you going to spend this $3.6 billion on then? You're not going to spend it on suggestions. The Treasury would work very closely with the Department for Transport, Network Rail, and of course, National Highways. The devolved administrations and mayors and local authorities. The detailed cost benefits analysis would be drawn up on each of these potential replacement projects before those would be prioritized. It is a process that would involve hundreds of officials over many months and the equivalent of a mini spending review. So while we could have been building HS2 and all the benefits that it would have brought, you could have announced that yes, we're actually going to invest in even more transport infrastructure, because there is nothing to say that you could not be building HS2 and investing in all that transport infrastructure as well. There is nothing to say that you could not have done both at the same time, because as we always said, those were a one-off cost. Once they are built, they are built. You can't just take them away. It would increase the economic potential of the UK You know, we keep on saying it every single time. You build it, you get the benefit from it. It's not that hard to understand. So he continues, it is perfectly clear that it is not what has happened in respect of the Prime Minister's conference speech. The decision on HS2 was rushed out because of media speculation. The government decided that it could simply not announce scrapping of one project without announce how it was going to be replaced. Given the fear of further leaks, a package was put together involving smaller number of officials plucking various ready-made projects off the shelf. And those aren't even actual projects. Some, as we said, are not only just suggestions, some were even already built, which is either incompetence or just sheer ignorance. I'll leave you to decide which is which. Predictably enough, it turned into an embarrassing shambles. Some projects that had previously been announced were included, as well as some projects that had been completed. Some of the announcements related to local projects for which the decision to proceed rested with the regional mayors, not central government. The overall package was described as being Network North, although it turned out that it was not much of a network and not exclusively in the north. Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, conceded yesterday that when the list of projects were not so much a program of work, but a list of examples of what could be achieved with the HS2 savings. That is certainly not the impression that Sunak gave last week. So even this Network North, as we've said, these suggestions, probably not even going to happen. And yet, another piece came out this that working class people, according to one poll, are abandoning the Tories in their droves. Are we shocked at this? No, we should not be shocked at this because still the cancellation of HS2 is still causing a lot of ripples, a lot of bad ripples up here. And I'm going to be very interested to see what the Red Tories do in response to this, because remember, they released a manifesto. One of those core things was HS2. We'll see how they respond to that. On the day of the announcement, when pressed whether he would be confident that any of this would actually happen, Sunak pointed out that the bus fares will be capped at £2 in November so that people could see the benefit. So we are seeing investment in a train line for the future replaced with a subsidy for bus fares now, hardly a long-term decision for a brighter future. This is a relatively small part of the £36 billion but the suspicion remains that we are going to spend less on transport infrastructure than was previously planned, despite the ministerial protestations. The 8.3 billion is going to be spent on potholes, and there are always worse ways of spending taxpayers' money than fixing potholes. But this maintenance is not capital expenditure. The wider point is that decisions on how to spend this 36 billion pounds appear to have been made in a haphazard and ill-informed manner, and they absolutely have. I think that is very, very clear. Literally came up in a Manchester hotel room. Where we lost HS2 and gained Network North, something which is just not even nearly as good or competently or is even going to get done in this time. It may be unfair to assume that these constant elements were chosen by an exhausted prime minister in a Manchester hotel room in the early hours of the morning. But that is exactly what it looks like from the outside, and that is exactly what probably happened. That is exactly what probably happened. It's not just that it looks like it did happen. But he continues. One can see the political imperatives to keep the process tight, to avoid any further leaks, and to make an early announcement, but it did not constitute doing politics differently from the last 30 years. In fact, it looks like a Brownian micromanagement combined with the Johnsonian frivolity. Thankfully, Gordon Brown was never frivolous, and Boris Johnson was never micromanaged. What is disappointing is that Sunak should be better than this. And again, I don't know why anyone or any conservative expected him to be better than this. He is a weak prime minister. He's constantly being bullied by all the different groups, pushing him in various different directions. One group gets upset, they start to push him. So another group gets upset, so they start to push him. He is a weak prime minister. He cannot control his party. You had 2 rival manifestos launched in 1 week. You had people basically launching their leadership campaign at that conference. The idea that Sunak is better, that he's a strong prime minister, that he has his party under control, is an absolute mirage. David Gauke should know better. He really should. But he continues. It is understandable that he wants to change gear, to take some risks, inject some energy into his policy agenda, and identifying the dividing lines with the opposition. But the way that he has gone about it has left him open to the charge of incompetence, the short-termism and hypocrisy. The best that can be said about this is that it looks very uncharacteristically, but nevertheless undermines one of the strengths of his reputation. And again, his reputation was never that good to begin with. Rishi Sunak, plucked from obscurity to become chancellor, on paper looked very competent compared to the shambolic Boris Johnson. He left. If there had been someone more competent in charge, I don't think we would be saying this about Rishi Sunak. Like, I really don't. So, let's finish this off. Does this leave an opening to Labour? The Tory attacks on Keir Starmer's flip-flopping may ring true, but as its conference gets underway today with the Shadow Chancellor's speech, there is an opportunity for Labour to set out its stall as a responsible government in waiting, generally waiting to take long-term decisions and set a steady course. Conservatives should be the party that can demonstrate that this would be more careful with taxpayers' money, determined to put in place a suitable investment environment for business investment, more willing to take long-term decisions, even if involving short-term pain. The Tories should not be complacent and assume that Labour can occupy this vacated territory. This is desperate. David Gauke trying to obviously defend Rishi Sunak and say, oh, well, this is so uncharacteristic from him. Well, and I like this top comment. Why is Gauke still allowed to express his opinion here? Interesting one on that. Who else is it? It would be easy as for Labour to propose a visionary long-term prospect for government and comfort its own annual conference, as it is for Mr. Gauke to take his usual Olympian view of the incompetence of his own government. Oh yeah, it's just the Olympian view. You can tell he doesn't have many fans on Conservative Home. But David Gauke here, the idea that, quote, he should know better. Absolutely not. He clearly doesn't know better. It's his own party's failings, the very, very fractious nature of his party he bore witness to. The very part of the faction that sort of gave him the boot, took the whip from him. And yet he's still trying to defend this absolute level of pure shambolic competence. I don't know whether Gauke thinks that Sunak might reward him. That's ridiculous. He's certainly not. He's probably not going to be in power long enough to be able to give you any reward, to be honest. Let's call it for what this is. And you called it right. That cancelling HS2 was an incredibly bad decision. Doesn't matter that you are, quote, skeptical about the choice. It was a bad decision all around. Replacing it with this northern network that isn't even in the north of, the northern network suggestions. Again, it's completely fanciful. It's not going to get the investment. They're going to do what they always do. We've got this £36 billion that we can invest in the north, and then I guarantee you they'll come back and say, oh, we're spending $1 million. What? How much are you spending? $1 million. What? $1 million. And they'll lie and they'll spend far less than they predicted. Most of that money ain't going to go on transport infrastructure. I can guarantee you that now. David Gauke even called it right in this as well. And I'm willing to bet on that is right as well. Cancelling HS2 is a absolutely awful decision. It shows a complete lack of foresight. And just, you want an example? Look at the bullet train being built in Japan. Over budget, came in over cost, took longer to build than initially thought. And yet, Japan reaps economic benefits year after year after year after year because it is built, it is running. They did not shy away from the costs. They got it under control by giving it subsidies, which, again, Rishi could have done. He could have given subsidies of some sort to HS2, given them incentives to help try and lower the price down. He could have sent in auditors to find out what's going on. Was it inflation? Was it something else? There's a ton of stuff they could have done. And yet, oh no, it's the easiest decision to cancel HS2. This is not playing well in the North. I will say this now. This decision to cancel HS2 is not playing well in the North. It is not playing well at all, even in these red wall towns that Rishi Sunak expects to still hold on to. And like I say, I'll tell you what, the morning after the next general election, oh boy, that following week, we are going to get article after article after article, probably on here, by these red wall MPs blaming Rishi Sunak, blaming their party for their loss. It's going to be a delight to read. I tell you that now. But as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.